What's up guys, it's Amanda. Welcome back to my channel and happy Artsy Fartsy Friday. Today we're going to be creating an image by using a reference. And although I'm going to be talking a little bit about using a specific reference to create this specific piece, I want you to know that you can pretty much take any of this advice and generalize it to just using references in your art in general. So the first thing that I'm going to do is pick my supplies, and I like to do this first before finding the reference because I find that it can kind of shape the way I look at references. I'm using a very limited selection of tools here, and this was actually sort of meant to be my Copic colors illustration, but I only had one of the official Copic colors from this month, so I had to find a reference image that complemented that one color nicely. This got me thinking about creating a high contrast portrait. So I did what any artist does in 2019, and I went to Google and I typed in high contrast portrait, and I searched through the images a little bit until I found one that I liked. I found a series of photographs of this girl and I thought they were really cool, very striking, and I could definitely see how this image would work with the supplies that I have picked out. So that was kind of my first step in this process, was just to find the supplies and then find an image that worked with that supplies. I guess you could also do this in the reverse order where you find the image and then find the corresponding supplies. I don't think that really matters in this case. The point I'm trying to get across is that I know that my reference image and my supplies are going to be compatible, which is going to make the rest of this process a lot easier. You might have also noticed that I have several reference images saved on my phone. While I was searching for images, I found a couple that I really liked, and so I wanted to be able to pull from multiple images. This is just general good practice when you are using reference in your work. Don't just look at one image. Look at several images and really try and dissect the image down into its basic parts. Maybe you like one image for lighting, but you like the other image for the fine details, the way the hair falls on the face, the way the eyelashes look, the way that the lighting hits the eyes. You can pull different parts of each picture to use in your piece. So although I primarily referenced one image for the composition of this piece, I did take some liberties from the other images as well as just my own imagination, and I think that's a big part of this as well. So I've sketched the image out on my piece of paper and I just have the basic shape down. I didn't hone in too much on the individual details. What I was really looking for was the areas of light and dark, and so I wanted to map those out as quickly as possible and then focus on the details later. I also think that it's important to be honest about my journey with using reference. When I was a younger artist, I was actually very against using reference at all. I wasn't comfortable using it, I didn't feel like I needed to use it, and since my art has developed, my opinion on references has developed as well. It wasn't so much that I didn't like using references, it's that I didn't know how to use them. I was so used to drawing what was in my mind that it was really hard to draw what was in front of me. And that can be a really hard skill to develop. It takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. Even when I look back at some of the drawings that I've done from referenced images, I can see that there is that inner part of me that's always trying to manipulate the image to be more like what I see in my head. Drawing what's in front of you takes time. And I feel like I'm slowly getting better at drawing what is in front of me and being able to capture the likeness of a photograph. However, there's part of me that still likes to preserve about 5 to 10% of the image to just be me, whatever I want. I want to change something, I want to add something. And I feel like giving myself the ability to do that is really important. So use reference in your art. It's obviously important, it's essential to improving, and it's the easiest and fastest way to learn and improve your art. It is undeniably an important part of being an artist, but you can pick and choose how you use reference, and there's really only a few ethical and good practice guidelines for you to follow. I also want to say that for much of this piece, it looks totally weird and crazy because I haven't really been focusing on those fine details, and instead I'm focusing on larger shapes of the shadows. So it looks really creepy right now, but it actually comes together quite nicely. Anyway, back to the topic of reference. I feel like a lot of people get a bad taste in their mouth when talking about reference because it's easy to fall down the rabbit hole of copying and plagiarism, and I feel like there is good reason to be cautious about artists using reference because it's not always clear how much they used reference, it's not always clear why they used reference, and I think it's really good to just be honest and transparent about that. If you are studying human anatomy, obviously you're going to need to look at pictures of the human body. Obviously you're going to look up photographs of models or images online to help you in that journey. There's not a problem with that. The problem is when you use a reference image and don't state it. If you use a referenced image but don't say that you were referencing something, that's where you can get into plagiarism and technically stealing intellectual property. I guess the one exception to this would be that if you changed the image enough, maybe you were only looking at one image because of the position of the arm, and then you were looking at another image because of the position of the hand, and another image for the position of the face. That would be a valid excuse for not necessarily referencing every single image because you're kind of piecing together multiple things. You're not necessarily pulling from just one source. So that's why I said it's probably good practice to have multiple referenced images. However, in this case, because I stuck so purely to one image and really didn't pull too much from the other images, it's pretty clear that I referenced this image, and I would be stupid not to say that I referenced this image. If I posted this picture online without saying anything, it would be totally valid for somebody to call me out and say, hey, this looks exactly like this photograph, why didn't you disclose this as reference? And I would be in the wrong. I was referencing somebody else's intellectual property to create something and potentially market myself off of that. It definitely becomes a more complicated situation if you reference something and end up making money from it. That becomes a whole other complicated endeavor. But my goal in this video is not to break down all of the laws and ethics about stealing art. It's mostly just to get you guys to think about reference in a new way. Reference is important. It's essential. But doing it the right way is equally as essential. The reason why is because it impacts your credibility as an artist. By referencing an image and not stating that you referenced an image, you are potentially leaving yourself vulnerable to being called out, being caught, and potentially being asked to remove an image or more. I know a lot of you who use reference out there do it in a completely harmless way, and there is never a malice intent. However, I think it's just good for you to be aware that some people are very protective of their intellectual property, and they have a right to be. I think within the art community, we're all very protective against art theft. I know personally, if I see one of my friends' artwork being posted without credit to them, I would be very defensive, and I would be very passionate about making sure that that person either takes down the image. I would obviously contact the original artist. I would do everything within my power to make sure that the artist gets proper credit. On a much larger scale, using reference images, even if they're photographs, works kind of the same way. The internet sometimes makes it easy to forget that those images belong to somebody, that somebody cared enough about photography to make a career out of it and to share those images with people because they felt inspired by them and they thought other people might too. So when you're referencing an image, ask yourself to put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in the shoes of the photographer. Would you be upset if you found out that somebody was using your image without your permission and potentially taking credit for it? I would be. And even though this image that I'm using here is from a large stock photo company, somebody still took this photo and somebody cared enough to share it. So I am going to be linking to the original reference source down below so that you guys are aware of where I got the image from, and I just want to be as transparent in that as possible. I think we need to make a habit here on the internet, and especially in visual media like YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, about just being honest with ourselves when we use reference. Using reference doesn't make you less of an artist. That's basically the whole point I'm trying to make. Instead of villainizing artists for using reference, let's celebrate them for attempting to continue their craft and continue improving. Let's celebrate their commitment to working hard at learning something. I think this is really important, and I feel like artists often get hit from both ends. They'll get criticized for using reference, but they'll also get criticized when something in their image is off, like the hand or the arm or the eyes. Well, the best way they could go about improving that would be to use reference, but I feel like a lot of artists refrain from using reference or refrain from disclosing that they use reference because they're afraid of the feedback that they'll get. So this pushes artists back into a corner where either they put off using reference and potentially don't improve as fast, or they do use reference but they don't disclose it, and now they're vulnerable to being called out or caught and potentially reprimanded for using reference without giving proper credit. So that is sort of the highlight of this video, and the essential point that I'm trying to get across is that reference isn't bad, but people make it seem bad, and there's definitely ways that you can use reference and misuse reference. So I think it just comes down to being open and honest about what the purpose of using a reference is. You don't have to necessarily disclose to the internet that you suck at drawing human anatomy and you're really self-conscious about the way you draw faces, and so you use reference. No, nobody's asking you to put your most vulnerable secrets out on the internet, and I don't think that's necessary to explaining why you used a reference in the first place. In this case, for me, I wanted to practice realism. It's not something I do very often, and while I don't necessarily think this is realism, it definitely is more realistic than my typical style, so this is a good chance for me to step outside of my comfort zone with that. Additionally, I don't use reference enough, and so I'm trying to practice drawing what I see rather than what my hand naturally wants to do. So that is my excuse for using reference. It's a completely valid excuse, and it's something that it is important to me to disclose. Because if you know why I'm using reference, then you know it's not because I'm lazy or because I don't have enough creativity to think of my own ideas. Instead, it's because I want to improve and I want to be a better artist, and this is one of the few ways that I know I'm going to improve. So that is basically the consensus of today's video, but I wanted to turn the conversation over to you guys and ask what your thoughts are on reference. Have you ever been called out for using reference? Have you ever had an experience where somebody ridiculed you for using reference or talked badly about you for using reference? Have you ever been encouraged to use reference and felt weird about it in some way, like you didn't know if you should or shouldn't? I feel like those of us who started out on the internet about 10 years ago posting art when it was all very, very new. You guys might have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm just interested in general about what you guys think, and I would love to hear your feedback in the comments. I definitely want to do more art chat related videos like this. If you're interested in how I actually picked this topic today, I did a poll over on Twitter, and I will probably be doing things like that in the future, so make sure you're following me over on Twitter if you would like to participate in future spontaneous video idea polls. So yeah, thank you to Twitter for helping me pick this theme. Again, I will have the link to where I found this reference image down below. I did change a couple of things, like I added these strands of hair on the left side of her face because I just felt like it balanced out the image better. While I felt like the photograph was very striking because it had that like black and white line, I felt like in the drawing it just sort of balanced it out. So that's what I mean by taking a little bit of that creative liberty at the very end. Even though I was referencing this image, I wanted to add a little bit of my own flair. And if you're interested in seeing this image close up, you can see it now at the end of the video, or you can also see it on my Instagram. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you liked it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. I also just want to give a shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much, Sam, Rachel, Patricia, Colby, and Danny. You guys are awesome. And I also wanted to shout out this week's Artsy Fartsy Friday artists. If you'd like your art to be featured, head over to either Twitter or Instagram and post your art using the hashtag ArtsyFartsyFriday, and you will be featured in next week's video. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on the internet. Bye!